So here's the little added video that I've put together for the rest of this hypothalamus and pituitary hormones. I don't know what happened to the second half of that last one, but anyway, this will cover that. We left off when we were talking about growth hormone, too much causing gigantism, giantism, and or acromegaly. Too little causes dwarfism. So dwarfism is just a condition where you don't grow to normal size. And somebody who has true dwarfism, there are a couple of situations. One is if you don't have enough growth hormone, you just don't grow very big and you stay really small. And the other kind is a genetic situation where your trunk and heads get normal size, but your arms and legs don't grow. The long bones don't get long. And so that's the kind of dwarf that, the Gimli in the Lord of the Rings and stuff. That's that. And they have similar strength in a lot of ways to a full normal sized person. But we're talking about the hormonal kind here instead of the genetic kind. And so if you don't make growth hormone, or you don't make insulin-like growth factor, your somatomedin, IGF-1, then you just none of your cells grow as much as they should. And that's a possibility. Generally, if somebody has that kind of abnormality, what they have is what's called Pan-Hypopituitarism. And pan is like a pandemic. It means widespread overall. And hypopituitary means your pituitary isn't working. So if your whole pituitary isn't working, then you're small. You also don't have sexual maturation. You don't have enough thyroid hormone. You don't make enough cortisol because you're not producing the stimulators for the thyroid gland and the adrenal gland. And so you wind up with a variety of deficiencies, not just being small. And you can make a normal amount of growth hormone, but if for some reason you can't make IGF-1, remember insulin-like growth factor from the liver is the way growth hormone stimulates the liver to make another product that lasts longer and therefore has a greater growth hormone type effect. Again, using the same kind of receptor, the catalytic receptor that growth hormone and insulin use, which is why it's called insulin-like growth factor. Here's someone suffering from hypopituitarism, 17 years old, and he's only 3'11". You see he also has no sexual maturation. You don't see the kind of development that you would expect to see in a 17-year-old. Too much growth hormone produces giantism. The actual true term is gigantism. It really had nothing to do with giantism, but it's a good way to remember it. Gigantism you have if you have too much growth hormone. This is often if there's a tumor on the pituitary that's secreting too much growth hormone directly. Then before your growth plates have sealed, you get big everywhere. You get really, really tall. If afterward you get acromegaly, if you have too much of growth hormone, but the growth plates have already sealed, you don't grow a whole lot taller, you just get wider. Your bones get really heavy, your jaw gets thick, your fingers get wide. Here's true gigantism. This Robert Wadlow was 8'11". He's the tallest on record, at least the last I looked. People are getting taller in general, so giants may be getting taller too. This is him with his scoutmaster when he was a Boy Scout. This is him with his, I guess that's his, this is him with his father here. So anyway, he was 8'11". He went around and gave speeches, apparently a really nice guy, but he died at age 22. It's really tough on you to have that kind of abnormal growth pattern. Now, acromegaly happened to this young woman. She was at age 16. she had pretty much stopped growing up. Many women stop getting taller around 16, 17, or 18, but she continued to make too much growth hormone. And by age 33, you can see the widening of the jaw, the widening of the forehead, and by age 52, the full-fledged acromegaly with the really wide fingers, the wide jaw, and so forth. And we've had a couple of famous people with acromegaly. Richard Keel, he played in one of the James Bond movies. He was Jaws. He had silver teeth and was, some great big guy. He was also tall. So he started growing tall when he was young, but 7'2" is not unbelievable height. We have other guys that reach that height without having this acromegaly. And Andre the Giant, same thing. He grew tall, but also really wide. The wide fingers, the wide jaw. He was a professional wrestler. Okay, so that's growth hormone. That's a big one. It comes straight out of the pituitary and goes and does its thing. It also goes to the liver and does its thing through IGF-1. These others will go to a tissue and stimulate that. So these are trophic hormones. And I'll mention right now that the first one I could have mentioned here is TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, the next lecture is all about thyroid stimulating hormone and thyroid hormone, so it got left out of this particular PowerPoint. But thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, is one of the hormones that comes out of the anterior pituitary. It goes to the thyroid and stimulates the thyroid gland to make thyroid hormones. And we'll see that plenty in the lab and also the lecture next week. This is another one of the ones that comes from the anterior pituitary. Remember, the hypothalamus would secrete corticotropin-releasing hormone. Those R's, the CRHs, the releasing hormones, all come from the hypothalamus. And then it goes to the adrenal cortex and causes it to release the adrenocorticoids, the glucocorticoids, which are, there's a few different ones. And then the increase in those becomes the negative feedback back at the pituitary and hypothalamus. The biggest one of those, which we'll also talk about in the next lecture at some considerable length, is cortisol. Cortisol is your main stress hormone, and it is released from the adrenal cortex in response to adrenocorticotropic hormone, adrenal cortex stimulating hormone. Circadian rhythm, it tends to go way up during sleep. That's when you're trying to heal and your stress hormones are having their effect. And the increase in cortisol itself is your negative feedback loop at the pituitary and hypothalamus. Okay. The rest of the anterior pituitary hormones, we did growth hormone, and we did thyroid stimulating hormone, and we did adrenocorticotropic hormone. We have to do the follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These are the gonadotropins. That means they stimulate the testes and ovaries, the gonads. Now, there are two different ones because the ovaries and testes have two different jobs. They have to make eggs and sperm, and then they also have to make hormones. So follicle stimulating hormone causes them to make eggs and sperm. Okay? Your follicles are your eggs and your sperm, depending on who you are. So follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, stimulates the testes and ovaries to make sperm and eggs, whereas luteinizing hormone has more of an effect on causing them to make testosterone and estrogens. So that's the other job. We're going to talk about these much more in the reproductive section of the course too. Prolactin is released from the anterior pituitary. It goes to the milk glands and causes them to develop and start producing milk. It is released mainly during the last part of pregnancy, when the woman's breasts get larger and they start making a lot of alveoli that will fill up with milk when they start making the milk. So it's the production of the tissue that makes the milk, and then the production of the milk itself. Prolactin, lactation, stimulates lactation. Now this slide looks really complicated, but this is a great slide. Here we have prolactin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, causes prolactin to be released from the anterior pituitary, and it stimulates the breasts. Here we have thyroid releasing hormone, causes thyroid stimulating hormone to be released from the pituitary, and it causes the thyroid gland to release your thyroid hormones. Corticotropin releasing hormone at the hypothalamus, ACTH, adrenocorticotropin hormone, or adrenocortex stimulating hormone, released from the pituitary, stimulates the adrenal cortex to make cortisol. Growth hormone releasing hormone causes you to release hormone from the anterior pituitary. It goes to the liver to make IGF-1, the somatomedins, and it also can go directly to the tissues to do its thing. Gonadotropin releasing hormone, releasing from the hypothalamus, causes your gonadotropins to be released from the pituitary. FSH for follicle stimulation, luteinizing hormone for hormone release. So it's all there. This is the hypothalamus. These come from the pituitary, and then these are the glands that get stimulated, and then it goes to, whatever tissue is going to get it. So that's a really good overall backup slide. Now we talked about the posterior pituitary. There are two hormones that come out of the posterior pituitary. Remember, they're actually made in the hypothalamus. They're neurons that will release that neurotransmitter, which is these hormones, from the posterior pituitary directly into the bloodstream. So they are your neurohormones. We're going to see both of these later too. Antidiuretic hormone acts at the kidneys to make you retain water. Okay? If you're getting dehydrated, you'll produce more antidiuretic hormone, so you don't pee as much. So you retain more water. Diuresis is peeing, so antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary. It has effects on uterine contraction during childbirth, and it causes milk release. It causes the muscles around the nipples to squeeze to squirt the milk into the baby's mouth when he's suckling. So prolactin causes your breast to make the milk. Oxytocin causes it to be released. It's called milk letdown, when it's taking the milk from your breast and letting it release out of the nipple. Antidiuretic hormone, water retention. It also causes vasoconstriction to some degree. It's called vasopressin because they sometimes give it to people who are in shock and have really low blood pressure, because it helps them retain water and squeeze their blood vessels to keep them from dying from low blood pressure. ADH. And oxytocin, milk letdown, and also contractions of the uterus during childbirth. Okay, that's the rest of that lecture. Hope that helps.